Hello, welcome to my channel and thank you for opening this video. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I like to string badminton rackets using the EasyStringer version 8. And I'm going to talk about why I think pulling two mains at a time is a good idea, why I think the two-piece method is very important and probably the best way to string any racket, including tennis or squash, and of course badminton. So here I am getting ready to string. I've just measured the string, put it on the racket, and I'm going to mount it on the EasyStringer bracket here. Now a lot of people, they think it's a 2-point support, so that's not good, when in reality it's actually a floating 3-point support, because the EasyStringer tension head will always support the frame exactly where it's pulling the string. So as where the string is coming out of the grommet, it pushes against the frame and acts as a floating support. And that's a very key point to understand, because that's one of the most important selling point of the EasyStringer tension head, is that it always supports the racket exactly where you need it to. I thread the first 4 mains because I'm going to be pulling 2 mains at a time. The reason why I think clamping 2 mains at a time is because it saves time. And the EasyStringer version 8 is able to pull a lot of string in one stroke. So even if you're pulling a super stretchy string, like many badminton strings are, most of the time in one stroke, you can actually pull 2 mains without having to clamp and reclamp. Now, of course, you have to remember that there is some friction going around the grommets when pulling 2 strings. So to compensate for that, I add about 1 to 2 pounds to the reference tension. In this particular racket, I am pulling at 16 pounds for the reference tension, but because I am pulling 2 mains at a time, I'm adding about 2 pounds, or I'm pulling a total of 18 pounds to compensate for pulling twice as long of a string and the friction going around the grommets. Now because I am pulling 2 strings and the friction around the grommets reduces the amount of tension going towards the secondary string, when I pull the string, I often press on the secondary string before pressing on the primary string to transfer tension to the secondary string to even out the tension. And this is something very important that you need to do in order to even out the tension so that both strings have the relatively same amount of tension. Otherwise, the string that you're pulling directly will always have more tension than the secondary string on the other side of the grommets because of the friction. As seen here, before I clamp, I always double check to make sure the tension is accurate. Of course, I just push down on the strings to transfer tension, and more often than not, you will find that the tension has dropped below the 18 pounds that I wanted. So therefore, I have to keep increasing tension to compensate for that. Now, oftentimes you can avoid this extra step by just pulling an extra amount of tension, such as if your reference tension is 16 and you're pulling 18 pounds because you're pulling 2 strings at the same time, if you don't want to keep going back and checking the tension and making sure that it stays at 18, for instance, you can pull a lot higher. Say you can pull at 22 pounds or 23 pounds or maybe even 24 pounds. And oftentimes that could be enough to end at 18 pounds after all the tension is transferred and the string settles down. So oftentimes, whenever I string a new racket with a different string at a different tension, I always experiment with the perfect amount of tension to pull so that I end up at the tension that I want. So it depends every time. And after a few pulls, you will find that, for instance, on this particular racket, with this particular string and this particular tension, if you pull 7 pounds more than the tension that you desired after transferring all of the tension from the primary to the secondary, you will find that the tension gauge will rest at your desired tension. But again, this is different for every situation that you string. So it's something that you just have to, a lot of trial and error. But after a few times, you quickly learn exactly how much tension you need to go over to save you the most amount of time. Pulling an excessive amount of tension is very easy and safe when your reference tension is very low, whereas in this case it is. My reference tension is 16 pounds. So there's really no problem for me to pull, say, 25 pounds. But of course, if your reference tension is over 30 or 35 or higher, you probably don't want to pull much tighter than that. So you just got to be careful. If your reference tension is 35, pull at 35, and just keep increasing tension when you notice that your gauge drops below 35. It's a little bit tedious, but it's something you got to be really careful of when stringing at very high tensions. Now in this video, I'm not really pulling that much above my reference tension or my desired tension of 18. So that's why I'm going really slow, really careful. But I wanted to do this to show to everyone how to do this for, say, stringing high tensions as well. To save your time, I will speed up the video until we get to the last two mains of the tie-off. The final two mains before the knot tie-off has the biggest tension loss. Therefore, I increase an additional 2 more pounds, or around 20 pounds, to compensate for the tension loss. Remember, the reference tension is 16. Pulling 2 mains at a time, I pull at 18. The last 2 strings before the tie-off knot, I pull 20 pounds. One of the reasons for using a 2-piece stringing method is that it allows me to do the same side on both the right and left last 2 pieces before the tie-off knot. I'm able to pull at 20 pounds, which is 4 pounds more than the reference tension of 16 pounds on both sides, so that both the tie-off knots on each side has the same amount of tension and both the right and left side of the racket is in balance. After I tie off both knots on each side, I'm then going to show you the most important reason for using a 2-piece stringing method, and that is string bed tuning. That is tuning the string bed of the racket before you put the crosses, because it's the mains that makes up how a racket really plays. If the tension of the mains are not consistent, then it will play inconsistent. The same way an untuned guitar or untuned piano will play inconsistent, and you won't be able to make good music. So in order to play good tennis, you must play with a very well-tuned racket. And now the most important reason why you must do a two-piece stringing method is the string bed tuning. Before string bed tuning, there are imperfections in the mains. Some mains will be looser, some will be tighter. These imperfections in the string bed must be corrected before you put the crosses in, because once you do the crosses, they will remain there forever until your next string job. The shuttle will fly more when it hits loose strings and fly less when it hits tight strings. Ideally, you want each string to have the same tension. However, each string's length is different. At the same tension, short strings will have a higher pitch, and longer strings will have a lower pitch when plucked. Therefore, when you strum the strings from one edge to the other, it should go from the highest in the beginning to the lowest in the middle, and then back to the highest at the other end. All you need to do is lightly press on strings that are too tight to transfer tension to the strings that are too loose. The last string before the night tie-off is always the loosest string, so that is why you always increase extra tension to the last two mains before the tie-off. So all you need to do is slightly press on the second to the last string to transfer the excess tension to the last main, and this is mostly all you need to do to tune the string bed. But just in case, it's always a good idea to go back and check the other mains and see if there are inconsistencies, and if there are, please adjust accordingly. Once you have confirmed the string bed is perfectly tuned, only then should you start the crosses. Okay, so now without my narration, please watch and listen to how it is properly done. Perfect. Now we can start the crosses. There are really no special techniques to doing the crosses. I usually thread the first two and do a double pull after the starting knot, because I don't want to pull directly on the starting knot because it can often cause the knot to fail. However, after I do the double pull on the first two strings, you do see that I transfer tension from the primary string to the secondary string, to make sure the first string after the knot is not unusually loose. Since I don't want to put any excessive strain on the knot, I usually don't increase the reference tension on the first double pull. So my reference tension is 16 pounds, so I do the double pull at 16 pounds for the first two main crosses. As I transfer tension, the tension gauge goes down, so anytime it goes below 16, you see me adjusting by adding extra tension. To avoid the trouble of having to add extra tension after you transfer tension, it probably is okay to go a little bit above the reference tension, such as maybe 20 pounds. But if you're doing high tensions, then it probably is not a good idea because it could cause the string to break prematurely. Either way is fine, whatever you think works best for you. After I finish the first two crosses, the remaining crosses are pulled one at a time because there's a lot of friction from the mains. So I don't recommend pulling two at a time for the rest of the mains. Now, the reference tension was 16 for the mains, but with the crosses, you're supposed to increase the tension by roughly 10%. So actually, the crosses, I'm also pulling at around 18 pounds. So in this method, most of the time, the mains and the crosses are pulled at the same tension. The only difference is that with the mains you pull 2 at a time, and with the crosses you pull 1 at a time. The last 5 crosses, I drop it down to the reference tension at 16 pounds because the head is the narrowest and the weakest. Okay, now that I've done the first 2 crosses, there's really not much more explanation. Just going to pull each string 1 at a time, and I'm going to fast forward it until the end of the video. This brings us to the end of the video, and you should have a good string job by now. And if there's any questions or comments in the video, please let me know in the comment section, and hope to see you next time.